The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble columns of the academy, as a 17-year-old from the northern frontier of Macedonia walked through its gates for the first time. The year was 367 BCE, and Athens, the intellectual heart of the Greek world, was about to encounter a mind that would fundamentally reshape human understanding of reality itself. Aristotle of Stagira carried with him none of the aristocratic polish of his Athenian classmates. Yet within his provincial exterior burned an intellectual fire that would illuminate the darkness of human ignorance for the next 2 millennia. The young man who entered Plato's academy that day was already marked by experiences that distinguished him from the pampered sons of Athenian nobility who filled the school's corridors. Born in 384 BCE in the small city of Stagira on the Chalcidice Peninsula, Aristotle was the son of Nicomachus, court physician to King Amyntas III of Macedonia. This connection to the Macedonian royal house would prove fateful. But even more significant was his early exposure to the empirical traditions of Greek medicine. While other boys learned poetry and rhetoric, young Aristotle had watched his father dissect corpses, catalog symptoms, and search for the physical causes of disease and death. The medical tradition that shaped Aristotle's earliest intellectual development represented a revolutionary approach to understanding the world. One that valued direct observation over inherited wisdom, systematic investigation over poetic inspiration. The Hippocratic physicians who trained his father had rejected the supernatural explanations that dominated earlier Greek thought, insisting instead that natural phenomena arose from natural causes that could be discovered through careful study. This empirical foundation would become the bedrock upon which Aristotle built his entire philosophical system, distinguishing him forever from teachers and contemporaries who remained content with abstract speculation. Yet Aristotle's formative years were shadowed by loss and uncertainty that would profoundly influence his mature thinking about human nature and political organization. His father died when he was still a child, leaving him an orphan in a world where family connections determined social status and economic security. His guardian, Proxenus, provided for his education but could not replace the intimate connection to royal power that his father's position had represented. This early experience of displacement and dependence taught Aristotle lessons about the fragility of human institutions and the importance of cultivating personal excellence that no amount of theoretical study could have provided. When Aristotle arrived at the academy in 367 BCE, he entered an institution that had already established itself as the premier center of philosophical education in the Greek world. For 2 decades, he would study under Plato, the most celebrated philosopher of his generation. Yet this relationship would prove to be one of creative tension rather than simple discipleship. Where Plato sought truth in the realm of eternal forms that existed beyond the material world, Aristotle found himself increasingly drawn to the concrete realities that surrounded him. The growth of plants, the behavior of animals, the structure of political communities. The intellectual environment of the academy fostered the spirit of inquiry, even when it challenged the school's fundamental assumptions. Plato had created not merely a school, but a research community where brilliant minds from across the Greek world gathered to investigate the deepest questions of existence, knowledge, and value. The daily conversations that took place in the academy's gardens and lecture halls exposed Aristotle to mathematical reasoning, dialectical argument, and systematic theorizing that refined his natural analytical abilities while providing him with the methodological tools that would enable his later achievements. Yet even as a student, Aristotle displayed the independent cast of mind that would eventually lead him to reject key elements of Platonic philosophy. His fellow students nicknamed him the Reader for his voracious consumption of texts, but his reading was never passive absorption of received wisdom. Instead, he approached every text as a problem to be solved, every argument as a hypothesis to be tested against the evidence of observation and experience. This critical approach extended even to the teachings of his revered master, leading to respectful but fundamental disagreements that would shape the future course of Western philosophy. The most significant of these disagreements concerned the relationship between universal concepts and particular things. Plato taught that ultimate reality consisted of eternal forms, perfect, unchanging essences that existed in a realm beyond the material world and served as the standards by which all particular things could be judged. Aristotle, drawing upon his medical training and his natural inclination toward empirical investigation, found this explanation deeply unsatisfactory. If forms existed in a separate realm, how could they explain the behavior of things in this world? How could the form of horse account for the specific characteristics that distinguished one horse from another? These questions led Aristotle to develop alternative theories that would revolutionize human understanding of reality. Rather than locating universal essences in a separate realm, he argued that forms existed within particular things as their organizing principles, the patterns that made each thing what it was and determined how it would behave. This insight, developed through years of careful observation and logical analysis, provided the foundation for systematic sciences that could investigate the natural world directly rather than seeking truth in abstract philosophical speculation. The death of Plato in 347 BCE marked a crucial turning point in Aristotle's intellectual development. Despite his 20-year association with the Academy and his recognition as one of its most brilliant members, he was passed over for leadership of the school in favor of Speusippus, Plato's nephew. This decision, whether motivated by philosophical disagreements or simple family politics, freed Aristotle to pursue independent research while forcing him to confront the practical challenges of supporting himself without institutional backing. The solution came through his connections to the wider network of philosophical schools and royal courts that characterized the fragmented political landscape of the 4th century BCE. Hermias, ruler of Atarneus in Asia Minor and a former fellow student at the Academy, invited Aristotle to join the intellectual community that had gathered around his court. This opportunity provided not merely financial security, but access to resources for empirical research that would prove crucial in the development of Aristotle's mature scientific method. The 3 years that Aristotle spent in Atarneus and the nearby island of Lesbos, 345 to 342 BCE, transformed him from a promising philosopher into the founder of systematic natural science. The coastal waters and diverse ecosystems of the Eastern Aegean provided an ideal laboratory for the biological investigations that would establish his reputation as the father of zoology. Working alongside Theophrastus, who would become his closest collaborator and eventual successor, Aristotle dissected hundreds of animal specimens, cataloged their anatomical structures, and developed the first systematic classifications of living things based on empirical observation rather than mythological tradition. These biological researches revealed intellectual capabilities that exceeded even the remarkable achievements of his academy years. Aristotle's History of Animals demonstrated an observational precision and analytical sophistication that would not be matched until the scientific revolution of the 17th century. His description of the reproductive behavior of sharks, based on direct dissection of pregnant specimens, remained the most accurate account available until modern marine biology confirmed his findings. His classification of marine life, according to anatomical similarities and differences, established principles of taxonomic organization that influenced scientific method for over 2,000 years. Yet Aristotle's scientific achievements during this period extended far beyond biology. His systematic approach to empirical investigation led him to develop general principles of logical reasoning and methodological procedure that could be applied to any field of inquiry. The works he composed during these years, including early versions of his logical treatises and his foundational studies in ethics and politics, revealed a mind capable of moving effortlessly between abstract theoretical analysis and concrete practical application. The personal dimension of Aristotle's life during this period also contributed to his intellectual development. His marriage to Pythias, the adopted daughter of Hermias, provided him with the domestic stability and emotional support that enabled his most productive scholarly work. When Hermias was captured and executed by Persian forces in 341 BCE, Aristotle mourned not merely the loss of a patron, but the death of a friend who had demonstrated that philosophical wisdom could be combined with effective political leadership. This experience deepened his understanding of the relationship between theory and practice that would become central to his mature political philosophy. In 343 BCE, a message arrived that would alter the course not only of Aristotle's life, but of world history. King Philip II of Macedonia, the brilliant military innovator who was systematically conquering Greek independence, summoned the philosopher to serve as tutor to his 13-year-old son Alexander. The irony of this appointment was not lost on contemporary observers. The greatest philosophical mind of the age was being asked to educate a prince whose destiny lay in conquest rather than contemplation, whose future empire would spread Greek culture through violence rather than through the peaceful transmission of wisdom. Yet Philip's choice revealed a sophisticated understanding of the educational requirements facing the Macedonian monarchy. The traditional warrior culture of Macedonia, though effective at producing military leaders, was inadequate for governing the diverse populations and complex territories that Philip's conquests were bringing under Macedonian control. Alexander would need not merely the tactical skills of a successful general, but the intellectual tools required to understand and administer a multicultural empire. Who better to provide such education than the most systematic and comprehensive thinker of the age? The 3 years that Aristotle spent as Alexander's tutor, 343 to 340 BCE, created one of history's most fascinating relationships between intellectual achievement and political power. The philosopher who had spent his adult life investigating the natural world and developing theories of human excellence found himself responsible for shaping a mind that would reshape the political geography of 3 continents. The young prince who would become Alexander the Great received from his tutor not merely training in rhetoric and political science, but exposure to systematic methods of inquiry that would influence his approach to conquest and administration. The curriculum that Aristotle designed for Alexander reflected his belief that effective leadership required comprehensive understanding of the world and systematic training in practical judgment. The future conqueror studied not merely military tactics and political theory, but natural science, ethics, literature, and logic. Aristotle's emphasis on empirical observation encouraged Alexander's lifelong interest in the plants, animals, and peoples he would encounter during his campaigns, while his training in ethical theory provided frameworks for thinking about the responsibilities of power that would influence Alexander's treatment of conquered populations. The intellectual relationship between tutor and student was complicated by their fundamentally different life trajectories. Aristotle, the son of a court physician who had achieved recognition through scholarly achievement, embodied the contemplative ideal that Greek philosophy had traditionally celebrated. Alexander, heir to a warrior throne and destined for military glory, represented the active life that philosophers had generally considered inferior to theoretical pursuits. Yet their collaboration produced insights into the relationship between knowledge and power that would influence both their subsequent careers. The political implications of this tutorial relationship extended far beyond its immediate educational objectives. Through Alexander, Aristotle gained access to resources for scientific research that no previous philosopher had enjoyed. The specimens, observations, and ethnographic reports that Alexander's armies would send back from their conquests provided empirical data that enabled Aristotle's later achievements in biology, geography, and comparative politics. At the same time, Alexander's exposure to Aristotelian methods of systematic inquiry influenced his approach to imperial administration, leading him to commission scientific surveys of conquered territories and to preserve rather than destroy the cultural achievements of subject peoples. The personal bond that developed between philosopher and prince during these tutorial years created lifelong mutual respect despite their divergent paths. Alexander's letters to his former tutor, preserved in fragmentary form by later historians, reveal genuine affection and intellectual gratitude. Aristotle's later references to Alexander in his political writings display pride in his students' achievements tempered by philosophical reservations about the human costs of conquest. Their relationship embodied the eternal tension between wisdom and power that has challenged every generation of intellectuals who seek to influence practical affairs. Yet even as Aristotle fulfilled his tutorial obligations, he was developing the philosophical system that would establish his reputation as one of history's greatest thinkers. The years spent at the Macedonian court provided opportunities for reflection on the relationship between individual excellence and political community that would inform his mature works on ethics and politics. His observation of royal decision-making processes deepened his understanding of practical reasoning, while his analysis of Macedonian military organization influenced his theories about the conditions required for human flourishing. As Alexander departed for his legendary campaigns in Asia, carrying with him the intellectual tools that Aristotle had forged, the philosopher himself stood at the threshold of his own greatest adventure. The young conqueror would reshape the world through the force of arms and the vision of empire, But his former tutor was preparing to launch a different kind of conquest, an intellectual campaign that would capture and systematize human knowledge itself. The boy who had once dissected specimens in his father's medical practice, who had challenged Plato's theories in the Academy's gardens, who had classified marine life on the shores of Lesbos and educated a future world conqueror in the halls of Pella, was now ready to return to Athens. But this time, he would come not as a student seeking wisdom from others, but as a master prepared to establish his own school and pursue the most ambitious intellectual project in human history. Nothing less than the comprehensive understanding of reality in all its forms. The Lyceum awaited, and with it, the systematic investigation of everything from the smallest details of animal anatomy to the largest questions of metaphysical truth. While his former student conquered kingdoms, Aristotle would conquer something far more enduring: the very structure of human knowledge itself. The Athens to which Aristotle returned in 335 BCE was a city transformed by Macedonian dominance, yet still pulsing with the intellectual energy that had made it the philosophical capital of the Greek world. 12 years had passed since he first left the academy, and the provincial student who had once walked nervously through Plato's gates now returned as a master philosopher with unprecedented resources and ambitions. The Lyceum he established that year would become not merely another philosophical school, but the prototype for every research university that would follow. A place where systematic investigation replaced casual speculation, and where the boundaries of human knowledge would be pushed to their absolute limits. The location Aristotle chose for his school revealed the scope of his intellectual vision. Unlike the academy, which occupied private grounds outside the city walls, the Lyceum was situated within a public gymnasium complex dedicated to Apollo Lycaeus, the wolf slayer god. This placement was deeply symbolic. Aristotle intended his school to engage directly with the practical concerns of civic life rather than retreat into ivory tower isolation. The covered walkways, peripatos, where he conducted his most famous lectures gave their name to his followers, the Peripatetics, and established a tradition of learning through movement that reflected his belief that knowledge must be actively pursued rather than passively received. The organizational structure of the Lyceum represented a revolution in educational methodology that would influence scholarly practice for millennia. Where earlier philosophical schools had centered on the personality and teachings of a single master, Aristotle created a research community that systematically divided intellectual labor among specialists in different fields. Students were assigned specific research projects that contributed to comprehensive investigations spanning the entire realm of human knowledge. The school's library, the first true research library in history, collected not merely literary texts, but scientific specimens, anatomical drawings, and ethnographic reports from across the known world. The daily routine of the Lyceum reflected Aristotle's conviction that effective learning required the integration of theoretical study with empirical investigation. Morning lectures addressed fundamental philosophical questions: the nature of reality, the structure of knowledge, the conditions of human flourishing, while afternoon sessions involved hands-on research in what would later be recognized as distinct scientific disciplines. Students dissected animals to understand anatomical structure, analyzed political constitutions to identify patterns of governmental success and failure, and collected botanical specimens to develop systematic classifications of plant life. The intellectual system that emerged from the Lyceum during Aristotle's 13 years of teaching there, from 335 to 322 BCE, represented the most comprehensive attempt to organize human knowledge that the ancient world had ever seen. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on abstract metaphysical questions, Aristotle insisted that genuine wisdom required mastery of both theoretical understanding and practical application. His corpus of surviving works, totaling over 30 treatises covering everything from logic and ethics to biology and rhetoric, revealed a mind capable of moving effortlessly between the most general principles of existence and the most specific details of natural phenomena. The logical treatises that formed the foundation of Aristotle's system established principles of valid reasoning that would dominate Western thought until the development of modern formal logic. His organon, the tool for correct thinking, provided systematic methods for analyzing arguments, identifying fallacies, and constructing valid proofs that could be applied in any field of inquiry. The syllogistic reasoning that he perfected enabled scholars to derive specific conclusions from general premises with mathematical precision, while his analysis of different types of reasoning illuminated the relationship between theoretical knowledge and practical judgment. Yet Aristotle's most revolutionary contribution to human understanding lay not in his logical innovations, but in his systematic approach to empirical investigation. His biological works, particularly the history of animals, parts of animals, and generation of animals, established principles of scientific methodology that would not be improved upon until the Renaissance. His recognition that different types of questions require different investigative approaches, his insistence on systematic observation and classification, and his understanding that scientific knowledge must be based on reproducible evidence rather than philosophical speculation, created the foundation for all subsequent scientific achievement. The sophistication of Aristotle's biological researches becomes apparent when compared with the level of knowledge available to his contemporaries. His description of the embryonic development of chick eggs, based on systematic examination of specimens at different stages of incubation, remained the most accurate account available until the invention of the microscope. His classification of marine animals, according to anatomical similarities and differences, anticipated the principles of modern taxonomy by over 2,000 years. His recognition that cetaceans were mammals rather than fish demonstrated observational precision that would not be matched until the age of scientific exploration. These biological investigations were guided by theoretical principles that reflected Aristotle's broader philosophical system. His concept of formal causation, the idea that each thing possesses an internal organizing principle that determines its characteristic structure and behavior, provided a framework for understanding the relationship between individual organisms and universal patterns. His recognition that biological classification must be based on essential rather than accidental characteristics led him to develop hierarchical systems that captured fundamental similarities while acknowledging specific differences. While Aristotle's achievements in natural science were extraordinary, his most enduring influence on human civilization came through his systematic analysis of ethics and politics, fields that he approached with the same empirical rigor that characterized his biological researches. The Nicomachean Ethics and the Politics, composed during his Lyceum years, provided frameworks for understanding human flourishing that have shaped moral and political philosophy for over 2 millennia. Yet these works were not abstract theoretical treatises, but practical guides based on careful observation of how human beings actually behave in different social and political circumstances. Aristotle's approach to ethics reflected his conviction that moral philosophy must be grounded in realistic understanding of human nature rather than utopian speculation about ideal behavior. His famous doctrine of the golden mean, the idea that virtue typically lies between extremes of excess and deficiency, emerged from systematic analysis of how successful individuals navigate the complexities of social life. His recognition that different situations require different responses, and that moral judgment cannot be reduced to mechanical application of universal rules, established principles of practical reasoning that remain relevant to contemporary discussions of professional ethics and political leadership. The political theory that emerged from these investigations reflected Aristotle's understanding that human beings are fundamentally social creatures whose individual flourishing depends upon the health of their communities. His systematic comparison of different constitutional arrangements, based on analysis of over 150 different city-state constitutions collected by his students, led him to conclude that the best governments are those that effectively balance competing interests while promoting the common good. His recognition that political institutions must be adapted to local circumstances and cultural traditions provided alternatives to both authoritarian control and democratic instability. Yet Aristotle's political philosophy extended beyond constitutional analysis to address fundamental questions about the relationship between individual excellence and collective welfare. His concept of distributive justice, the idea that resources should be allocated according to merit and contribution rather than mere equality, influenced debates about economic policy that continue to the present day. His analysis of the conditions required for genuine friendship and civic solidarity provided insights into social psychology that anticipated modern research on community formation and group dynamics. The educational theory that informed Aristotle's approach to both ethics and politics reflected his conviction that human excellence must be cultivated through systematic training that integrates intellectual, moral, and physical development. His concept of habituation, the idea that virtue is acquired through repeated practice of virtuous actions rather than through theoretical study alone, established principles of character formation that influenced educational practice throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. His recognition that different individuals possess different natural talents and inclinations led him to develop differentiated approaches to education that maximized each person's potential contribution to communal welfare. The crowning achievement of Aristotle's systematic philosophy was his metaphysical investigation into the fundamental structure of reality, an inquiry that produced insights into the nature of existence, causation, and knowledge that continue to influence philosophical discussion to the present day. The Metaphysics, composed throughout his Lyceum years and constantly revised as his thinking developed, addressed questions that had puzzled Greek philosophers for centuries. What makes things what they are? How can we account for both permanence and change in the natural world? What is the relationship between universal concepts and particular things? Aristotle's solutions to these problems were grounded in his systematic rejection of Platonic dualism. the idea that reality was divided between an eternal realm of perfect forms and a temporal world of imperfect copies. Instead, he argued that universal essences existed within particular things as their formal causes, the organizing principles that made each thing what it was and determined how it would behave. This insight, developed through decades of biological research and logical analysis, provided a unified framework for understanding both natural processes and human activities that avoided the explanatory problems that plagued earlier philosophical systems. The doctrine of the four causes that emerged from this investigation, material, formal, efficient, and final, provided tools for analyzing any phenomenon that would prove invaluable for subsequent scientific and philosophical development. His recognition that complete understanding of anything required knowledge of what it was made of, what structure it possessed, what brought it into being, and what purpose it served established analytical frameworks that guided inquiry in fields ranging from natural science to literary criticism. His insight that different types of explanation were appropriate for different types of questions prevented the reductive tendencies that had limited earlier philosophical investigations. Perhaps most significantly, Aristotle's metaphysical investigations led him to develop theories of potentiality and actuality that provided solutions to fundamental problems about change and permanence that had paralyzed earlier philosophers. His recognition that things could exist in potential form before being actualized through appropriate processes explained how genuine novelty was possible while maintaining the principle that nothing comes from nothing. His understanding that every change involved the actualization of pre-existing potentials provided frameworks for analyzing development that would prove crucial for later scientific advancement. The theological implications of Aristotle's metaphysical system revealed the sophistication of his thinking about ultimate questions. His argument for the existence of an unmoved mover, a perfect being whose activity of self-contemplation provided the final explanation for all natural processes, influenced theological development in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam while establishing rational foundations for belief in divine existence. Yet his God was not the personal deity of popular religion, but the logical conclusion of systematic philosophical analysis. A being whose perfection consisted in pure intellectual activity rather than providential concern for human affairs. Aristotle's influence on human civilization extended beyond philosophy and science to encompass the systematic analysis of human creative expression. His Poetics, though surviving only in fragmentary form, established principles of literary criticism and aesthetic theory that have guided artistic creation and evaluation for over 2 millennia. Yet this work was not merely an abstract theoretical treatise, but a practical manual based on systematic analysis of the literary achievements of his predecessors and contemporaries. The concept of catharsis that formed the centerpiece of Aristotle's dramatic theory emerged from careful observation of how audiences actually responded to tragic performances. His recognition that effective drama must evoke specific emotional responses through the careful construction of plot, character, and language provided writers with tools for creating works that could both entertain and educate their audiences. His analysis of the relationship between universal themes and particular circumstances illuminated the conditions under which fictional narratives could convey genuine insights into human nature and social relationships. The rhetorical theory developed in Aristotle's rhetoric reflected his understanding that effective communication required systematic attention to audience psychology, argumentative structure, and emotional appeal. His classification of different types of speeches, deliberative, judicial, and epideictic, provided frameworks for analyzing public communication that remain relevant to contemporary studies of political persuasion and legal advocacy. His recognition that rhetorical effectiveness depended upon the speaker's credibility, the logical structure of arguments, and the emotional engagement of audiences established principles of communication theory that influenced educational practice throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. Yet Aristotle's approach to literary and rhetorical analysis was guided by the same empirical methodology that characterized his scientific investigations. Rather than developing abstract theories about ideal artistic expression, he systematically analyzed the techniques that successful writers and speakers actually employed to achieve their effects. His recognition that different genres required different approaches, and that artistic excellence could not be reduced to mechanical application of universal rules, provided alternatives to both formalistic rigidity and romantic subjectivism. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC marked the beginning of the end of Aristotle's Athenian period. The anti-Macedonian sentiment that swept through Athens following news of the conqueror's death in Babylon created a hostile environment for anyone associated with Macedonian rule, and Aristotle's well-known connections to the royal family made him a target for political persecution. The charge of impiety that was brought against him, the same accusation that had led to Socrates' execution 76 years earlier, revealed how completely the political climate had shifted against Macedonian influence. Rather than face trial and possible execution, Aristotle chose exile, withdrawing to his mother's property on the island of Euboea with the famous observation that he would not permit Athens to sin twice against philosophy. This decision reflected both practical wisdom and philosophical principle. Practical because it avoided martyrdom that would have served no useful purpose. Philosophical because it demonstrated his conviction that the pursuit of truth transcended political loyalties and cultural boundaries. The final year of Aristotle's life, spent in rural retreat on Euboea, provided opportunities for reflection on the extraordinary intellectual journey that had begun 62 years earlier in the court of the Macedonian kings. The provincial boy who had arrived at the academy as an awkward outsider had become the most systematic and comprehensive thinker of the ancient world. A philosopher whose investigations had extended to every field of human inquiry, and whose methods had established foundations for scientific and philosophical development that would endure for millennia. Yet Aristotle's final months were shadowed by the recognition that his most ambitious hopes for the integration of theoretical wisdom with practical application had not been fully realized. Alexander's empire was fragmenting into competing kingdoms. The Greek city-states were returning to their traditional patterns of internecine warfare, and the political institutions that he had analyzed so carefully in his constitutional studies were proving inadequate to address the challenges of governing diverse populations across vast territories. When Aristotle died in 322 BCE at the age of 62, he left behind an intellectual legacy that would reshape human understanding of reality in ways that he himself could never have anticipated. The systematic approach to empirical investigation that he had pioneered would eventually blossom into the scientific revolution that transformed European civilization. The logical methods that he had developed would provide tools for theological and philosophical analysis that influenced the development of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The ethical and political theories that he had constructed would guide discussions of human flourishing and social organization for over 2,000 years. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Aristotle's achievement was his demonstration that systematic intellectual inquiry could encompass the entire range of human experience, while maintaining both rigorous standards of evidence and practical relevance to the challenges of daily life. His conviction that genuine wisdom required the integration of theoretical understanding with empirical investigation, of abstract principles with concrete applications, of individual excellence with communal welfare, established an ideal of comprehensive learning that continues to inspire educational institutions and intellectual communities throughout the modern world. The influence of Aristotelian thought on subsequent human development extended far beyond the boundaries of formal philosophy and science. Medieval Islamic philosophers like Averroes and Avicenna developed his insights into sophisticated systems that preserved and transmitted Greek intellectual achievements during the European Dark Ages. Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas integrated Aristotelian principles with revealed religion to create synthetic worldviews that dominated European thought for centuries. Renaissance humanists rediscovered his literary and rhetorical theories to create new forms of artistic expression that continue to shape cultural production to the present day. The scientific revolution of the 17th century, though it ultimately transcended many specific Aristotelian conclusions about natural phenomena, was built upon methodological foundations that he had established. His insistence on systematic observation, his recognition that different types of questions require different investigative approaches, and his understanding that genuine knowledge must be based on reproducible evidence rather than abstract speculation, provided the intellectual framework within which figures like Galileo, Newton, and Darwin could develop their revolutionary insights. Even more fundamentally, Aristotle's vision of human beings as rational creatures capable of understanding their world and improving their condition through systematic inquiry established anthropological assumptions that continue to underlie modern democratic institutions, scientific research programs, and educational philosophies. His conviction that individual flourishing depended upon active participation in communities devoted to truth-seeking and moral development provided alternatives to both authoritarian control and relativistic nihilism that remain relevant to contemporary debates about the foundations of civilized life. The boy from Stagira who had watched his father dissect corpses in the Macedonian court, who had challenged Plato's theories in the Academy's gardens, who had classified marine life on the shores of Lesbos, and educated a future world conqueror in the halls of Pella, had accomplished something far more enduring than military conquest or political dominance. He had created intellectual tools for understanding reality that would serve humanity's quest for knowledge and wisdom until the end of time. In the final analysis, Aristotle's greatest achievement was not any single discovery or theory, but his demonstration that the human mind, properly trained and systematically employed, could penetrate the deepest mysteries of existence while remaining grounded in the practical requirements of flourishing life. The universal genius who had promised to investigate everything had delivered on that promise in ways that continue to bear fruit over 2 millennia after his death. His legacy lives not merely in libraries and lecture halls, but in every laboratory where scientists seek to understand natural processes, in every courtroom where advocates appeal to principles of justice, in every classroom where teachers help students develop their intellectual and moral capacities. The mind that changed the world had accomplished something even more remarkable. It had shown that worlds could be changed through the patient application of human reason, guided by systematic observation and tempered by practical wisdom. In an age still struggling with the relationship between knowledge and power, between individual excellence and collective welfare, between theoretical understanding and practical application, Aristotle's example continues to illuminate the path toward genuine human flourishing grounded in the pursuit of truth. Subscribe and welcome to the Empire.